The photo sat on my desk like a dare, a challenge to the cynicism I'd carefully cultivated over 2 decades of covering small-town life. Miller's Hill, usually the backdrop for bake sale announcements and lost dog posters, now played host to something extraordinary, something terrifying. The image was seared into my memory, the impossible size of the craft, the way the moonlight glinted off its metallic hull, the eerie silence that seemed to emanate from the photograph itself. It was like staring into the face of something ancient, something unknowable. And those figures, those silhouetted shapes huddled beneath the craft, bathed in its unearthly glow. They were like moths drawn to a flame, their fate uncertain, their humanity hanging by a thread. I flipped the photo over. Scrawled on the back, in a shaky hand, were 3 words that sent a shiver down my spine. They came back. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled with a primal fear, a deep-seated unease that whispered of things best left undisturbed. I'd seen my share of strange occurrences in my time at the Beacon. Gatlin Creek had a way of drawing in the unusual, the unexplained. But this was different. This felt dangerous. A low rumble of thunder shook the building, the wind howling like a banshee outside my window. The storm, brewing on the horizon all day, had finally broken. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the fear, taking root in the pit of my stomach, whispering that some things are best left buried. The phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through the silence like a scalpel. It was Deputy Dave, his voice tight with urgency. "You gotta get down here, Mike. It's happening again." "What's happening? What are you talking about?" His answer, choked and breathless, sent a chill down my spine. "Miller's Hill. They're back." Whoa. The phones had been ringing off the hook since dawn. Hundreds, maybe thousands, had witnessed the event. It wasn't just some late-night, drunken hallucination. The entire town had been painted in that eerie silver light for almost an hour. Facebook was ablaze with blurry photos and shaky videos, the digital airwaves crackling with a mix of fear, excitement, and disbelief. Even Mayor Harker, a man who wouldn't acknowledge the existence of his own reflection unless it was during a campaign speech, couldn't deny what half the town had captured on their smartphones. My gut churned with a potent cocktail of journalistic instinct and something else. Something colder, that tightened its grip with every new call. I dove headfirst into the story, the scent of printer ink and stale coffee, a meager comfort against the tide of unease rising within me. This was my town, my job. Someone had to sift through the noise, find the truth buried beneath the hype and hysteria. But as the day wore on and the calls kept pouring in, a terrifying pattern began to emerge. These weren't just excited whispers, giddy speculations fueled by too much caffeine and science fiction. There was an edge to their voices, a tremor of fear that resonated with a primal dread I couldn't shake off. It started with Mrs. B. Henderson, her usually chipper voice trembling as she described a man in black at her door, asking about the lights. Then came Old Man Fitzwilliam, his voice raspy with terror, claiming the same men had visited him, warning him not to talk to the press. Each call was a brick in a wall of fear, a wall that separated me from the life I thought I knew. The air in my office, usually filled with the comforting clatter of the keyboard and the rhythmic hum of the printer, crackled with an unseen energy, a premonition of something ominous lurking just beyond the veil of normalcy. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was something personal, and as the shadows grew longer outside my window, a terrifying thought took root in my mind. They were coming for me next. It started subtly. A black sedan parked across the street from the Beacon's office, engine idling, 2 men in dark suits inside. Just a coincidence, I told myself. Small towns attract their fair share of government busybodies. But then the calls started. Men in similar suits, their voices smooth and devoid of warmth, asking pointed questions about the witnesses, the photos, the evidence I was collecting. Just routine, they assured me, their words as sterile as a surgical instrument, a matter of national security. But the way their eyes lingered on me, cold and calculating, sent a shiver down my spine. My gut, usually a reliable barometer of bullshit, churned with a fear I hadn't felt since I was a kid hiding from my father's drunken rages. They weren't interested in the truth. They were here to bury it. The pressure mounted with each passing day. The phones at the beacon went silent. Calls that had once buzzed with tips and leads now met with an eerie quiet. The few folks brave enough to speak muttered about men in black cars. Veiled threats whispered on doorsteps under the cover of darkness. Fear, contagious and insidious, seeped into Gatlin Creek like a gas leak, poisoning the very air we breathed. Then late one night, as I was piecing together the remnants of the story, a shadow fell across my desk. I looked up, my heart hammering against my ribs. Two men stood in my doorway, their faces obscured by the dim light of the hallway. They were tall and imposing, their suits cut with a precision that spoke of money and power, their faces expressionless masks that sent a chill down my spine. "Mr. Edwards," one of them said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in my bones. "We've been watching you. We know you've been asking questions." I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. My hand instinctively went to the drawer where I kept a dusty old baseball bat, a relic from a time when I thought I could outrun my demons. "You've seen things you shouldn't have seen," the other man said, his voice devoid of inflection. "Things that could complicate matters." He took a step closer, and the air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable menace that pinned me to my chair. My hand, hovering over the drawer handle, froze. This wasn't a threat. This was a promise. And as I stared into the abyss of their unblinking gaze, a horrifying truth settled in my gut like a lead weight. I'd stumbled onto something far bigger, far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The library's musty silence, usually a comfort, felt stifling. The internet, my usual source of information and distraction, seemed to be whispering warnings, each click of the mouse echoing with an unseen threat. I'd stumbled down a rabbit hole of government cover-ups, of shadowy organizations tasked with silencing the truth about extraterrestrial contact. Conspiracy theories, most of it. The stuff of late-night radio shows and dog-eared paperbacks. But as I dug deeper, unearthed declassified documents, grainy photographs, and eyewitness accounts stretching back decades, a pattern emerged. A pattern that mirrored the events unfolding in my own town. Mass sightings followed by swift, brutal silences. Witnesses discredited, evidence confiscated, lives disrupted, or simply erased. My stomach churned. This wasn't just some fringe theory. This was a machine, well-oiled and ruthlessly efficient, designed to keep the truth hidden, whatever the cost. A chill snaked down my spine. What if those men in suits, those shadows lurking at the edges of my vision, weren't government agents at all? What if they were something else? Driven by a mixture of fear and journalistic instinct, I started digging into local archives, dusty old newspapers, and microfiche reels that smelled of forgotten time. The Beacon might have been a small-town paper, but we had a century-old archive, a testament to the belief that even the smallest whispers deserve to be recorded. Days turned into nights, the lines blurring as I followed a trail of half-truths and whispers. There were stories, hushed and horrifying, of strange lights in the sky, unexplained disappearances, and a palpable fear that clung to the town like a shroud. Each story ended the same way, with a denial, a retraction, a sudden silence. One name kept surfacing: Elias Croft, a local eccentric who claimed to have proof of extraterrestrial contact. He'd even published a pamphlet, a rambling, incoherent screed about alien abductions and government conspiracies. The paper dismissed it as the ravings of a madman, but the fear in Croft's eyes in the accompanying photograph was impossible to ignore. He disappeared a week later, vanished without a trace, his house emptied, his pamphlet nowhere to be found. The police report cited no evidence of foul play, but the words rang hollow, a familiar refrain in a town where the truth had a way of vanishing into thin air. I had to find Croft's pamphlet, had to hear his story. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack, but it was the only lead I had. Late one night, while sifting through boxes of old town records, I found it. Tucked away in a dusty corner, hidden beneath a pile of tax documents, was a single copy of Croft's pamphlet. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and anticipation as I carefully pulled it out. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, the title scrawled in a shaky hand: They walk among us. My blood ran cold. Beneath the title, someone had scribbled a single line in red ink. Don't believe the lies. They're listening. The late afternoon sun, already dipping below the tree line, cast long, distorted shadows across my living room floor. I sat hunched over Croft's pamphlet, the words swimming before my eyes, each sentence a jagged shard of fear piercing the fragile shell of my composure. It was worse than I could have imagined. Croft's words, a chaotic mix of paranoia and chilling detail, painted a picture of a world where humanity was nothing more than a science experiment. Our lives and deaths orchestrated by beings who walked among us, their true motives shrouded in darkness. A sudden noise from outside sliced through the quiet, sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. A car door slamming, footsteps on the gravel driveway. My pulse quickened. Paranoia, a constant companion these days, whispered its poisonous doubts. Were they here? Had they followed me? Their patience finally exhausted? I crossed to the window, peering through the blinds. My chest tightened. Parked at the curb, bathed in the dying light of the setting sun, was a black sedan. Its windows were dark, impenetrable, like the eyes of the men who'd visited my office. Two figures sat inside, their silhouettes barely discernible through the tinted glass. Watching, waiting. A wave of dizziness washed over me, my hand instinctively gripping the windowsill for support. The room seemed to tilt, the familiar shapes of my life distorting into a menacing tableau. Fear, primal and instinctive, tightened its grip on my throat, stealing my breath. This was it. The moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. The confrontation I'd convinced myself was just a figment of my overactive imagination. They'd found me. And judging by the cold, predatory stillness of that car, they weren't here for a friendly chat. The silence in the room pressed down on me, heavier than the cheap particle board desk that had been my companion for 2 decades. The men in suits had left as abruptly as they'd arrived, their departure leaving the void filled with a different kind of dread. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, their words echoing in the silence. Don't dig any deeper. They don't want you to know. It's for your own good. The words themselves were innocuous, almost paternal, but the tone was a promise, a whispered threat that sent a shiver down my spine. I thought about calling the police, reporting the incident, but what'd I say? That 2 men in suits had stopped by for a friendly chat about UFOs. I'd be laughed out of the precinct, my career at the Beacon relegated to covering bake sales and town council meetings. Fear, a cold fist, tightened around my gut. My gaze drifted towards the corkboard above my desk, a collage of headlines and half-written stories, the tangled threads of an investigation I was being warned to abandon. And in the center, the photo, the damn photo, seemed to mock me. A silent accusation of my own naivete. What had I stumbled onto? What kind of story was I chasing that warranted this kind of response? Later, nursing a burning tumbler of bourbon, I tried to convince myself it was just a prank. Some bored kids, hopped up on sugar and scary movies, playing a cruel joke on the town crank. But the doubt lingered, a persistent itch under my skin. Sleep, when it finally came, offered no escape. The dreams were vivid now, no longer fragmented shadows and whispers. I saw the face of the pilot, his features twisted in a silent scream as the craft plummeted towards the earth. I felt the heat of the flames, smelled the acrid stench of burning metal and flesh. And always, those eyes, black, unblinking, watching me from the inferno, filled with a cold, alien amusement. The next morning, I awoke to find the front page of the Beacon splashed across my porch. The headline a screaming indictment of my sanity. Local reporters' UFO obsession sparks fears for mental health. Below, a photo of me, looking haggard and haunted, taken from my editor's less than flattering angle. The accompanying article, a masterpiece of character assassination, painted me as a washed-up drunk, obsessed with a story that existed only in my fevered imagination. The phone rang, the shrill sound piercing the fog of my hangover. It was my editor. "You're off the Croft story, Frank," he said, his voice weary. Take a vacation, see a doctor, I don't care. Just stay the hell away from the beacon. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, a final punctuation mark on my descent into chaos. The email arrived on a Saturday. Subject line screaming hope in bold, flashing letters. My finger hovered over the delete key, the cursor blinking like a malevolent eye. Hope was a dangerous thing these days, a cruel trickster promising solace only to yank it away, leaving you drowning in deeper despair. But curiosity, that damn itch that had gotten me into this mess in the first place, won out. The sender was a name I didn't recognize. The email address a jumble of letters and numbers that meant nothing to me. The message itself was short, cryptic, almost pleading. I know what happened at Miller's Hill. I can help. It was followed by an address, a time, a single sentence that sent a chill down my spine, even as a flicker of hope sparked in the desolate landscape of my chest. They don't want you to know the truth. For a day, I wrestled with the decision. The rational part of me, the part that still clung to the tattered remnants of my career, screamed at me to hit delete, to forget about Miller's Hill, to disappear into a bottle of bourbon and let the world spin without me. But the other part of me, the part that had seen the photo, the part that had felt the cold breath of something sinister on the back of my neck, couldn't let it go. The address led me to a diner just across the state line, a greasy spoon with a faded neon sign and a clientele that looked like they'd stepped straight out of a Flannery O'Connor story. My contact was a woman, younger than I expected, with anxious eyes and a nervous energy that vibrated in the space around her. She called herself Rachel, wouldn't give me a last name, and spoke in hushed tones, her words tumbling out in a torrent of paranoia and fear. "They are watching us," she whispered, her eyes darting around the diner as if expecting the walls to sprout ears. "They control everything. The government, the media, even the people we trust." She claimed to have worked at a government facility, a place where they brought things from the crash site, for study. She'd seen things, heard things, that no human being was ever meant to know. And she had proof, she said, evidence that would blow the lid off the whole conspiracy. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the thrill of the chase momentarily eclipsing the fear that gnawed at my insides. This was it, the break I'd been waiting for, the chance to expose the truth, to redeem myself. We agreed to meet the next day, a secluded spot in the woods just outside of town. But as I was leaving the diner, a black sedan pulled up beside me, sleek and silent as a predator. The men inside, their faces obscured by shadows, rolled down the window. It was the man from my office, his eyes, cold and hard as granite, boring into me. "Forget what you saw," he said, his voice a low growl. "Forget what you think you know. And forget about Rachel." He nodded towards the diner, a slow, deliberate gesture that sent a chill down my spine. The diner was empty, the chairs overturned, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood. Rachel was gone. The clearing was bathed in an ethereal glow, the towering pines around me swaying rhythmically in a wind that didn't seem to touch the ground. The air crackled with an energy I could feel on my skin, a tingling sensation that set my teeth on edge. In the center, a shape was emerging from the swirling mist, resolving itself into the unmistakable silhouette of the craft, a vast metallic disc, its smooth surface reflecting the moonlight in distorted waves. The hum, a deep resonant thrumming that seemed to vibrate in my very bones, intensified, shaking the ground beneath my feet. The rational part of my brain, the part that clung to the familiar laws of physics and the comfort of skepticism, screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this impossible sight as humanly possible. But my feet were rooted to the spot, my gaze locked on the craft as if drawn by an invisible tether. A section of the hull irised open, a gaping maw of darkness framed by pulsating lights. I watched, transfixed as a ramp silently extended downwards, reaching out like a beckoning finger. There was no question of turning back. Not now. I walked towards the light, each step heavy, deliberate. A slow march towards a destiny I didn't understand but couldn't escape. The air grew colder as I approached the craft, the metallic scent of ozone stinging my nostrils. And then I saw him. He stood at the top of the ramp, bathed in an unearthly glow, his features etched with a familiarity that transcended time and reason. It was the pilot from my dreams, his face a mask of pain and defiance. His eyes, those black, bottomless pits, fixed on me with an intensity that stole my breath. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice a low rasp, devoid of inflection yet somehow filled with the sorrow that resonated deep in my soul. "They'll never let you leave." I stopped a few feet away from him, my gaze locked on his. "Who are they?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "What happened at Miller's Hill?" He tilted his head, the barest hint of a smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Don't you remember?" And in that moment I did. The silence after the memory was deafening. It pressed down on me, heavier than the humid air, thick with the scent of pine needles and something else. Alien. The clearing, once a place of terror and revelation, now felt empty. The echoes of the spaceship's hum fading into the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a loon. I was alone, utterly alone. The memory, vivid and horrifying, played on a loop in my mind. The crash, the fire, the screams, my screams, the things I had witnessed, the things they had made me forget. And him, the pilot, his eyes filled with a pain I now understood, a pain that mirrored my own. I stumbled back to my car, my legs shaking, the earth tilting beneath my feet. The woods, once a place of refuge, now felt menacing. The trees watching me with silent, knowing eyes. My hand instinctively went to the back of my neck, expecting to feel the cold touch of their control, but there was nothing. Just a dull ache, a throbbing reminder of the truth I could no longer outrun. They had taken everything from me. My memories, my sanity, my life, and they had replaced it with... what? A terrifying awareness, a burden of knowledge I was never meant to bear. As I drove away, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of blood, orange, and bruised purple. A single question echoed in the cavernous EMP. Tightness of my mind. What now? There were no answers. Only the long, lonely road ahead, and the chilling certainty that they were still out there, watching, waiting. And they hadn't finished with me yet. The weight of the gun was unfamiliar in my hand. Cold steel, a stark contrast to the clammy sweat clinging to my palm. The events of the past few days played on a loop in my mind. The visit, the threats, the disappearance of Emily. I had spent my life chasing stories, hunting for the truth buried beneath layers of lies and half-truths. Now, I was living a story too terrifying to print, the truth more monstrous than any fiction I could conjure. A single sheet of paper lay on the table, the words scrawled in my own hand, a desperate plea bargain with fate. "Stop the questions, or she's gone." My hand shook as I reread the note, each word a nail hammered into the coffin of my old life. They'd taken her, just like they'd taken old man Hemmings, like they'd taken countless others, erasing them from existence as easily as you'd swat a fly. They thought they could silence me, thought they could buy my obedience with threats and fear. They'd underestimated me. They'd underestimated the power of a story untold, the burning need to shine a light on the darkness, no matter the cost. This wasn't just about Emily anymore, about one man's shattered life. This was about the truth, a truth they were so desperate to keep hidden. The phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through the silence like a siren. My hand tightened around the gun. This was it, my one shot at defiance. "Hello?" My voice sounded alien, even to my own ears. A hollow chuckle, cold and empty as a grave, slithered through the receiver. "You misunderstand," the voice rasped, each word sending a fresh wave of chills down my spine. "You had your chance. Now it's time for you to join the others." The line went dead. A wave of dizziness hit me, the room tilting precariously. It was happening again. The same disorientation, the same pressure building inside my skull. I dropped the phone, the gun clattering to the floor. As darkness closed in, a single, terrifying thought cut through the fog of my mind. This wasn't a punishment. This wasn't about silencing me. It was about control. They were always in control. And now, they were taking me somewhere else. Somewhere they needed me to be. The last thing I saw before the blackness consumed me completely was the photo on my desk. The metallic disc hung suspended in the night sky, no longer a harbinger of fear and uncertainty, but a beacon. I promise. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning.